policies. Okay, start again. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming to our first session on policies and research organizations for research software, or PRO4RS. This is a joint working group between the Research Data Alliance and the Research Software Alliance. I'm Dan Katz from University of Illinois. We also have two of the other co-organizers on who maybe will just say hello just very briefly, Michelle and then Hugh.
Hi, I'm Michelle Baca from the Research Software Alliance.
Hi, and I'm Hugh Shanahan at Royal Holloway, which is part of the University of London.
Great, thank you. And can we go on to the next slide here?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so yeah, so we're going to kind of talk about the working group just briefly, which I will do, and then we'll talk about the three subgroups that are active from Hugh and Michelle in this case, and then I'll talk about some future steps that we're thinking about and where you can join in as well. Next slide. Oh, I guess Michelle, if we wanted, maybe I don't do we have the link to the slides in the notes as well? Or I just noticed
that.
Yeah,
I've put it in the notes. Yeah.
Okay. Great. Okay. All right. So yeah. So again, thanks very much for everybody who's come. As I said before, this working group is jointly organized under RDA and RISA. And we're happy to be supported by the RDA Tiger program from the Netherlands eScience Center, which basically is giving us some logistical support, which is very nice. As we saw, we have three of us co-chairs who are on out of 8 that are here. Michelle, myself, and Hugh, and then the other 5 who are listed. I think this is good. We've had some experience in the past with having a relatively large number of co-chairs, and this generally helps because we have people in different time zones who can do things, people who can lead different groups, and just people that have different experience. And that's not to say that we couldn't have groups that are led by other people. And so I would say if you have things that you're thinking about that fit into what we're doing that we're not thinking of in a current group, then please let us know and we can potentially start something else, or if not immediately, maybe later. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So the reason that we have this group is because research software is increasingly important and increasingly being used. It is built by researchers in many cases and by research software engineers in other cases. If you're not familiar with the research software engineer title, that's generally people who are staff in research organizations who are focusing on the software itself, whereas the researchers are typically focused on the research. And the researchers need the software in order to do their research, and sometimes they write it themselves, and sometimes there are staff members who write it for them or with them. These two different groups then have different objectives. The research software engineers generally focus on the software itself and its users. Often software can be built for one group of researchers, but it can be used by lots of groups of researchers, or sometimes it can be built for a large group just to begin with. And as I was saying before, for the researchers, they're more likely to be interested in the research results, the outputs, the graphs, the data that come out of the software, more so than the software. But neither of these are absolute statements. Many researchers are quite interested in the software, and many RSEs are interested in what gets done with the software. Research organizations who employ either researchers or RSEs or both benefit from research software because it enables the research to happen and it enables the software to get built. And everybody that we've talked about benefits when research organizations advance the sharing and reuse and management of research code or research software. Okay, next, please. So having said that research software is important to the institutions where researchers and RSEs work, the next piece that follows from that then is that if the people that are actually writing the research software have guidance and are able to write better software through better knowledge, that leads to lots of other benefits. And so this basically means that organizations often want to be sure that developers know good practices or best practices and which to pick and how to use them. These institutions also want to make sure that the value of these practices are recognized and the risks of not using them is known, that the principles of sustainability and reproducibility are embedded in software development whenever possible to make the software that's produced then more sustainable and more reproducible, or at least the results from it more reproducible. And they also often want to develop software policies and guidance that can underpin the quality of research by improving the quality of the software that the research relies on. Okay, next, please. So kind of with that in mind, the things that we've come together to do in the PRO4RS working group is to build community initially, a community of stakeholders who are either developing or promoting these institutional level policies that support research software, to identify existing institutional policies and guidelines, again, working with the community, when needed, to support the organizations that are hiring the people so that they can develop better processes to ensure sustainability of research software and reproducibility of outputs. To look at the policies and community demands that exist and to analyze them and to try to understand what's common about them and what should be common about them, and to use that then to define a set of principles on which research software policy can be based. Once we have that idea, then we can look at existing policies and try to understand where there are gaps, where they don't quite live up to the set of principles. And then to try to develop effective policies, more effective policies, and help them be actually adopted through case studies where we can examine work that has gone on to either improve or adopt new policies and what the results of that are. And overall, then, this is aimed at really standardizing institutional research policy, which doesn't mean that there would be an institutional research policy, but that there would be some kind of maybe set of practices that an institution would choose from. And those practices would be understood, and the reasons that the institution would choose them would be understood from the context of the institution and its work. Okay, next, please. So when we started this, we, along with all other RDA groups, wrote a case statement, and that was what was approved by RDA. And the case statement has really 5 aims and deliverables. And so the first one is to identify existing policies in this area. Again, policies by research performing organizations about research software. And the delivery of that is a database of research software policies. We also want to collate resources on supporting policy change. So if we don't have a policy, that if an institution doesn't have a policy and there are people at that institution that want to change the policy, how do they actually do that? And so we want to collect resources about best practices in terms of actually making policy changes. Then, as I was saying on the previous slide, to actually create this common framework for research policy that institutions could use to pick elements that would make sense for them, to identify areas where these policies are lacking, and that would hopefully create new areas in the framework, new areas for existing policies, and then to identify case studies that can increase adoption. And for that, we would create a report, or we will create a report that provides some of those case studies. So if you're interested in these things, you can join the working group. Well, I guess in the past, I would have said you just go to the RDA website and you go ahead and do this. I'm not 100% sure if this part of the RDA website is currently working, but if it's not, it should be soon. And you certainly will be able to do this, even if you're not today, and maybe you are today. I haven't checked recently. Okay, thanks, Amy. So, okay, and then next slide. All right, so now we're on to the subgroups, and I guess sorry, I didn't say, but maybe I should say that in some of the previous groups that some of us have been organized in, we found that having subgroups that can go off and focus on areas and then come back together and report on what they've done is an effective way of doing this. And we have 3 subgroups at this point in the PRO4RS working group, and so let's go on to the first one.
Okay. Thanks, Dan. So I'm just going to report back from subgroup 1. Just to note, the whole working group got kicked off 6 months ago in Salzburg, which feels like a very long time ago now. And this first subgroup was to engage with the community to identify examples of policy, which we could add on to the database that RDA already put together of institutional policies that support research software in particular. Now, just to note, we've got the Derriere QR code for the Google form if to add more things to that database. And if anybody is, you know, is kind of, oh, hang on, actually, there's something we should, there's another policy there that should be added on there, then by all means, please do. But to note, I think what we're trying to do at this stage is that, you know, here after 6 months, this is kind of the work of this subgroup is going to kind of wind down in terms of just gathering more data. Now, there are some criteria in terms of what we have sort of put up onto what we've added onto the RDA data set and is already there. So in particular, we want to be as open as possible and as reproducible as possible. So we're only putting up policies that are sort of publicly available. We know that there are a few more policies that are out there that are either sort of an institution has them and they're kind of just keeping them under wraps, or there are some policies which are very much kind of being used within an organization, but never kind of get to that point where they've never been published. And it's unfortunate, but we're just kind of putting them to one side effectively to make sure that everything that we want to see that people can see them. So I said, if you're aware of any policies for software, please, if you and you think maybe that hasn't been put on there, there's the webpage. We'd certainly be happy to accept them. Now, just to note, in terms of what we've sort of has been put together, actually there wasn't a colossal number of extra policies were added, probably less than 10 extra policies. We also had a conversation about 2 weeks ago with fairsharing.org. So fairsharing.org are very much, they're all about the data, but they also are about, you know, all things associated with data, including standards and policies. And they do have, again, a small set of policies that are there, which we still haven't sort of added on there to the list, but there's something like 14 of them there, and we need to just look at them just to see, okay, is it just mentioning software name, or is there any sort of content that's in there? So what kind of policies are we interested in, and which are about openness? So the policies that are very much within scope are ones that are associated with research software, not software in general, but specifically for research software. And it's also objective policies for the people who develop and maintain research software. So that includes research software engineers. So here's a kind of a list of sort of bulleted list of items that we think are very much in scope. So we'll talk about open source software licensing, which very much dominates the policies that we've seen so far. Open science, fair research outputs, research skills and training, research assessment reform, so anything to do with DORA, etc., research infrastructure, and research data, at least in that kind of context of software and so on. Now, to know, this is again, for people who are still interested in submitting something, this is not meant to be necessarily an exclusive list. Please feel free to add things on if you think so. It's it's not meant to be there. I mean, we've had, one submission, for example, which was on generative AI, for example, which we've looked at and went, yeah, no, that's not really opposite. But again, we're more than happy to see things, and it's very much subgroup 3 that will actually do the kind of more hard work in terms of looking at the kind of taxonomy and so on of terms, and also looking at, for example, what's missing. Sorry. Okay, so in terms of the kind of policy landscape that we've seen, this is still not, this is not the full picture. You can go and if you go onto the RDA site, you can see the full list that's there, including the ones that are added on. But this is a sort of a flavor of some of the things that we've received there. So what we're seeing is that institutions are providing support for technical professionals. So in particular, for instance, the software side, and in particular about thinking about enhancing their career paths. So the policies that do exist can be on funding, career paths and their recognition, the citation of software, access and licensing, the use of software, management plans, or you could think about research outputs in that kind of more general language. So some of the resources that we've seen so far of relation to software recognitions, policies, and career paths. And these include things like a case study from Illinois, Manchester, and Notre Dame. We've got a list of the RSE groups from around the world and proposed research software standards. There's also a really nice document that's been set up by TU Delft, which is on sort of a general sort of view on research software policies. And we've also seen a number of organizations, and indeed, predominantly what we see are organizations providing policies on software licensing. So for example, CERN, Imperial College in London, and the Finnish Meteorological Institute. So at this point, I will hand over to, I think it's Michelle, to talk about subgroup 2, if that's all right.
Thanks, Hugh. I'm Michelle Barker, the Director of the Research Software Alliance and one of the co-leads of Subgroup 2. So both Subgroup 1 and Subgroup 2, we opened up for anyone to join in. And so I'll be talking about what we've achieved. So our goals were to create some resources on how to support policy change in research institutions in practice. We wanted to ensure by the time our working group had finished all of our goals, that we provided more than just a list of policies, of exemplars and what your policy should have, but could assist people, institutions to then think about how they get that change happening within their organization. So we asked publicly for contributions on resources that might give advice on this. We're just writing up a blog post or report at the moment about what we found. There are a few examples there that you can go in and look at. So you can see we had a range of resources. We've ended up with about 15 that will be in the report that will come out in about 3 to 4 weeks. We ended up with a range of resources, things about generally how to make policy change in an organization, right through to things very specifically about how you can influence our research software change. So as I said, that subgroup's just about wound up. The report will be out soon, but if you can think of any useful resources, you can still share them with us. Thank you. Next slide, please. I'm also one of the co-chairs for subgroup 3, which is just starting up. Now that we have the list of policies from subgroup 1, we want to do some analysis of this to create a common framework. And we're actually also going to end up doing the work of subgroup that had been planned for subgroup 4, which was a gap analysis of what policies aren't present. I'm sorry, I've got a sore throat, so it's just a little bit hard for me to speak. As this group is still starting, we're still playing around with how to create a common framework and what that could mean. So I'm just going to give 2 examples that we've been looking at for inspiration. The first is from the Open Research Funders Group, who created a policy clause bank to help funders create open science policies. And in the section on research software, they note that there's a range of levels at which a funder could word their policies, depending on how permissive or restrictive, what kind of level of obligations they require. So there's a range of levels. Level 1, simply encouraging things around code and software sharing, right through to level 4, right through to requiring. Next slide, please. The other example we were looking at was this work done by the Bridge project, which sought to harmonize research data governance policies at a range of levels in France, but they would heavily utilize work of an RDA data policy interest group. So that interest group in the RDA, which I actually think might have been called something like the data availability group, not the data policy, looked at the code availability, the code requirements of a whole lot of publishers to see what kinds of elements they each had. So here you can see they've analyzed about 6 policies to see which of these parts or items or aspects are covered in their policies, from a definition of research data right through to having a data management plan. So we're trying to brainstorm what this could look like for research software policies. What are all the aspects of research software that need to be covered in an institution's policy? Bearing in mind, as Hugh explained, that research software may need to be present in multiple policies. Even if an organization has a policy, a single policy called research software, as 2U Delft do, research software would still need to be integrated into a range of other policies as well. And many organizations may never have a policy called research software, but simply have research software mentioned in a whole lot of other policies. So how do we give guidance to institutions? And so we're trying to look at all the different aspects that they should cover in a suite of policies. We're still in the early stages of that. So if you could think of any other good categorizations you've seen we could learn from, or want to join that subgroup to consider how to do that categorization and give some guidance, then please do contact me or any of the co-chairs. Next slide, and I think it's back to Dan.
Yeah, sorry, just trying to find the unmute. Yeah, so what we're doing in some sense is partly for us and our institutions, but it also ties into other things. And so one of the other things is the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And we ideally want to contribute to the SDG 9, build resilient infrastructure. And we think that this potentially also could contribute to some of the other SDGs. And then there's a number of other kinds of things that are going on that we also feel tied to, although it's not necessarily us contributing to them. It's more maybe collaborative in some ways than contributing to us or us working together in some sense. So one thing is that there is a movement that seems to have started in the last few years of open source program offices, or OSPOs. This is something that was mostly in industry in the past, but again, in the last few years has moved into research performing organizations. And so there's a number of universities or national laboratories or other groups that now have OSPOs. There's even there's a group called Curious that's a kind of consortium of OSPOs now. And then there also are open technology offices. And so clearly the policies that both of these kinds of offices have would overlap with what we're looking at and what we want to work on. And so working through these groups would be one way that we can hopefully influence research performing organizations, at least in the organizations that have one of these two kinds of offices. There's an effort that RISA sponsored called Adore.software, which is the Amsterdam Declaration on Research Funding, and I'm not quite sure why it's E and not F, but it is. And so that's a place where we've gotten together a number of research funders, global some philanthropic funders, mostly national government funders, some industry funders as well. And it's a set of 12 principles that they have helped us with, and a number of them have now signed up to as endorsing. And so in addition to the principles that go along with how research software is funded, there's also a toolkit that provides examples and definitions. And so the work of PRO4RS probably will fit into that toolkit in some way as a new kind of set of tools, a new set of policy tools. And then finally, UNESCO has the Open Science Toolkit, and similarly to what we're doing, there's a lot of work on policy around open science in general. And so policies around research software fit into that as an element. But hopefully we can also learn from things that they're doing in other non-research software areas and bring some of them into research software. Okay, next slide. Right, and then there's a number of other RDA groups as well that are relevant. I guess I'm not going to exactly explain why each of these are relevant, but we do see a connection to at least these 5. And we're interested in your ideas about other RDA groups that we should also be connecting with in some way. Some of these are groups that are working on policy. Some of them are, well, I guess they're all groups that are working on policy in one way or another, but they're not necessarily all the same policies. So, I think after this, we're going to have some questions. Hugh, can you just go forward for a second? Oh, yeah. Okay, so let me. Well, okay, so let's go back for a minute and just and I'll just ask at this point if anybody does have suggestions. Sorry, can we go back one slide, Hugh? Thank you. Oh, okay, so forward one. Sorry, maybe there's a delay in what I'm saying. Okay, thank you, that one. Yeah, so I just wanted to say if anybody does have other groups, yeah, as Amy has just done, if you want to put anything in chat, that's great. Or if you want to put anything in the notes document, that would be helpful as well. And as Michelle commented that we probably forgot to say, we'd appreciate it if you could put your details into the collaborative notes document as an attendee of this first session as well. Yeah, so thank you, Amy. Evaluation of research. Great. Yep, that would make sense. And so if anybody knows of anything else, again, please put it into either the chat or the notes. All right. Then going onward, Hugh. Thank you. So in the Netherlands, the Netherlands eScience Center and NWO, the Netherlands funder, and to the universities, VU Amsterdam and TU Delft, ran a workshop on research software policies. And the intent of that workshop was to understand what was going on in the Netherlands in terms of research software policy, to talk about national and international initiatives to the people that came, to basically start creating some community around this area and to exchange expertise, and to gather input on what else the Netherlands eScience Center and NWO as the funder could do. I'll just mention, if you're not familiar, the Netherlands eScience Center is, it's not a funder and it's not a government organization exactly, but it kind of plays some of that role in some case, and in some areas, NWO funds the eScience Center to be a service organization for other activities going on in the Netherlands, including offering some calls for support and some other things. So they were, again, those two organizations were interested in what they could do to help the universities and the other research performing organizations. And so just here we're just showing a couple of things. One being the survey that they did of the people that attended, asking if the organizations had a research software policy. And I guess I would say, pleasingly, from my view from the US, they had actually fairly good answers where about a quarter of the organizations had a policy, and another quarter were working on it. And I don't know, another some percent were planning to, and then maybe a third didn't. But I think this is actually quite promising, or quite quite ahead of a number of other areas of the world, including my own. And so then again, these hosts of the eScience Center and NWO are going to be creating follow-up events and sharing information and linking to international initiatives like PRO4RS. Okay, next, please. All right, so that's really what we wanted to kind of talk to you about. We have actually quite a lot of time left to talk about how we make progress, what we're not doing that we should be doing, what you might want to do working with us. Basically anything that you would like to talk about that will help this this idea of developing policies around research software or that include research software within research performing organizations. And so I think there's a little bit of structure on the next slide or two. All right, so yeah, so on one side, we're just looking for input in general. If there are additional policies, to add them. Again, we're going through the process now of starting to do the analysis, but it's not too late to talk about additional policies. And that's for basically for subgroup 1 and for subgroup 2, there's the idea of effectively, I'm not sure I want to say policies about how research policies are changed, but guidance about how research policies are changed, or lessons about how to change research policies in general. And so we're also interested still in those, as Michelle was saying, in subgroup 2. We will have a subgroup 5, I believe, that will actually look at use cases. So kind of what's actually happened. How have groups changed their policies? What's the effect of policies? How have policies changed how research happens, or how staff work happens, or how people are rewarded, or things like that. So we're looking for places where research policies either are making a difference, or there's interesting work in how to actually change a research policy or how to create a research policy. So we're interested in that as well. And then third is what you can align with. And as I said before, you can add any of these things to the notes document, or you can put any of these into chat. And either of those would be great, or if anybody actually just wants to say anything, I think we have time just to open it up and have any discussion at this point about these 3 things at least. Yes, Amy.
Hey, Dan. 2 questions about just who you've been working with in collecting these policies. First question is, have you reached out to and these are, sorry for everyone else, but this is within the US community. Have you reached out to the data librarian community about finding other policies at other universities? Because I'm thinking they might be the other group that would know about some of that.
I think the answer in some sense is not specifically to them,
Okay.
but I think we would hope that some of the outreach that we've done has gotten to them, but we haven't gone to them specifically. So
Okay.
maybe that we've missed, or at least it's almost certain that there are some of them that haven't seen what we've said. So yes, that's a good point. If you have any pointers as to specifically how we could do that, that would be great.
Yeah, actually, yes, absolutely. Go ahead and feel free to contact me offline, and we can talk about that. The other group within the US is through the ORFG. Have you had connection with Helios?
We have
Okay.
not. Let's see. I'm trying to think if we have directly in this. So so I was one of maybe, I don't know, 10 or 12 people that co-wrote an opinion piece with Helios that Greg
Okay.
led,
Yeah,
or maybe
yeah.
Caitlin led. I can't remember who exactly, but it was on. It was basically on what we thought how we thought research software policy should be changed by funders, but it was actually focusing on the university side, and so that's another good suggestion that I think we've reached some of Helios, but we haven't done it in such an organized way as we probably should have. So thank you.
Yeah, the other reason for Helios is I heard that it's apparently a recent thing where they have upper administration, so presidents and VPs of research as their own special group. So that might be a place to instigate some of that policy push as well in Helios.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, they had, I'm trying to think, they had some kind of a meeting within the last month where they had about 50 kind of higher level people, and I actually don't know what came out of that. Don't feel like it was, feel like it was recent enough that they probably have said something that I might have just missed, but it wasn't really recent as well. So
And just for the other part of that is that Helios overall might be a good group on that. Sorry, I don't remember which of the subgroups it is, but on the advice on how to get policies changed within research performing organizations.
yeah, subgroup 2. Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, thank
That's
you.
all. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. Any other comments or suggestions?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, you're, oh, okay, you were
Oh,
very,
and
I can
I'm
see you.
now in focus.
Yes.
Yes, okay. Hi, Daniel. So I haven't been around for the formation of this group, but I do see the call in the Reason newsletter for policies. And I'm pretty certain my institution doesn't have a software policy, but then I had a look at what was in the research spreadsheet. And I wondered, both from the point of view of trying to contribute, but also more generally, it's clear that universities have open science policies and they implicitly include software, research software. How is the group actually dealing with this? For all I know, this is a well-answered question, or I'm opening a can of worms. I'm not sure.
Yeah, Hugh. Sorry, you're muted, Hugh.
Thanks very much. And Vashti, no, that is a really good question. I would and the answer is we don't particularly have a way of filtering that out. I think the only thing that I'm going to put a little straw man to defend myself, and I'll hide behind, which is to say, the experience I've had, for example, from my institution, sort of setting up its own open research policy, is that effectively there is a bullet item which says, yeah, you should be open with your software as well, and very little after that. And hence I think it's more useful for us. I think those institutions are like putting that in as a placeholder to say, oh, this is a good thing. And actually they're really like looking for things, and hence having more kind of considered work, more weighty stuff that say, which are really sort of saying, this is what your research software policy is on X, is I think the thing that would be more useful. Now, if there are, please feel free to kind of sort of say, no, wait a minute, there's X, Y, and Z and 50 other institutions that have done something good. Great. It's just, it's, in terms of us sort of advertising this and spreading it out and so on, generally it was pretty quiet. People were just not getting back to us or saying, this is a good idea. I'll love to see it when things come out. And as I said, I think the other thing that's sort of very dominant is how much things like, the same stuff kind of crops up in terms of things like licensing and so on. But and then maybe some stuff on careers, but it fades away, and that's that kind of the gap analysis I think is
Right,
going
yeah.
to be important for subgroup 3. So I'm sorry, actually I don't know if I've answered your question or just bored you to tears, but
I don't think it was certainly not meant as an attack, so I'm not sure the straw man was necessary. No, I suppose part of my question is, in terms of the data you're gathering, should I be looking at the general stuff that my university says on open science because it implicitly is about software, or are you looking for explicit statements?
I think we're looking for explicit statements.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, I mean, just from my point of view, I would say if there's a policy that doesn't have an explicit statement, then we would kind of see that as something that we would want to try to change over time.
Mm.
Not necessarily we could, but yeah, ideally.
Yeah. So I mean, some policies are written in terms of they only talk about data, but it's clear that software is sometimes implied. Others talk about digital objects, which possibly include software. It's really fuzzy out there, and I guess that's what part of what this group is doing is to reduce the fuzz. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm very interested the way that as you said that. I think Vashti, Tom appeared on camera because I think he might have something to say about that. So over to you, Tom.
The raising the specter of open science and open science policy reminded me of models of policy differentiation between norm enforcing and aspirational, and hard and soft policies, and moral and so on. And I think the interesting thing about leaning into the space occupied by open science is that it's very much in the aspirational end of the spectrum. But when it comes to practices around software, I want Dan to disagree with me on this, but I would say my impression is that a lot of software development is already done in an open way. And so open science is largely when you are calling for people to develop their software in an open way, they may not be doing it in exactly the right way or the best way of doing it, but they are more often than not doing it in an open way compared to how data is handled as a norm in general practice. And so as a pool of policy, it's more norm enforcing than aspirational. Compared to some of the other changes that are being called for in open science practice. The reason I put my hand up was actually to say, in that toolkit of models of change for policy and going into that framework work, I'm wondering if you're also drawing on that literature that, and I might be able to dig up a reference for you, that does make those slices through the policy landscape and say, you've got to differentiate between policies that are about flagging a change that needs to happen versus one that basically reinforces one that isn't recognized but is actually largely undertaken by the community. In which case I can dig up that reference if you like.
Sorry, so Tom, just because you asked me to, I'll disagree with you.
Go for it.
No, so I think it's funny. I think that I think it depends a lot on the field. So I think there are a number of fields where open software is the standard, and then there are other fields where it really isn't. And people may be still using version control and Git, but they're doing things in private repos and they're not necessarily sharing them, or they're thinking about them, that there's some potential for commercialization that they're planning on, or maybe they're working in, I don't know, computational chemistry where they're going to contribute their code to something that is not technically open, but is free to academics. It's funny, I was just thinking, I was talking with somebody last week who works on one of these computational chemistry codes, and he was saying that because of the work that they do on it, they get about 140,000 US per year in return. That comes basically from the professional people from industry that's using this code, and that enables them to support a large number of students and do a bunch of other stuff. And somehow that model is the one that's been accepted in that field, even though it's a model that wouldn't be accepted in high energy physics or some other areas, for example. So I don't know. I don't think that there is an answer to that. I guess the other.
Like we don't have a complete picture yet as well. Yeah.
Right. I guess the other thing I was going to say, which kind of goes a little bit to what you were saying and also to what Vashti was saying, is that during this visit that I was on last week at University of Sao Paulo, I was talking with their open science working group, and they were kind of talking to me about the presentation that they're going to give to their provost next week to try to get university policy changed for open science there. And so open source is a strong element of their policy. It's right. They have a number of different, I think maybe 4 or 5 different themes that they're thinking of, and software is one of those themes. And so I think a number of places that are doing this work now are being pretty explicit about software, whereas ones that maybe have an open science policy from, I don't know, 5 years ago, maybe don't necessarily, because it wasn't kind of thought of in the same way. So I think this is something also that's changing. And again, from our point of view, where there are good open science policies that don't explicitly talk about software or talk about outputs, but don't say what those outputs are, I feel like that's part of what we would like to change. Michelle.
Yeah, I'd like to pick up on Tom's point. Yes, Tom, I'd love to have the references you have about the range of policies, because exactly one of the issues we're coming up with in subgroup 3. So even though we have this suite of policies, some are simply encouraging changes. Some of them are obliging their community, requiring them to make changes. So I'd love to see those. And just to go back to Vashti's questions on do we include open science policies? So I think from memory, we have the CERN open science policy in our database because it does have some quite explicit section on software. But I think we also have the University of Sheffield's commitment to open science, and which is it's not even called a policy, it's actually a commitment, and many organizations have commitments. So it's questionable whether we should be including that, but I think we did include it because it actually does make some commitments, but it's not actually translated into policy requirements. It's just theoretical commitments from the top level. So whether or not that will stay in, we're not sure. So we're still grappling with all these questions of what we mean by policies and what should be in scope and how to deal with that. So yeah, those questions are all really relevant.
Yeah, I guess I'll just say also we had Hugh talked a little bit about the fact that the policies need to be public, and part of the reason that came up was some discussion that we were having with the Department of Energy here in the U.S., where we were asking them about their policies, and they said that we should talk to the individual national labs and look at their policies. And so we wanted to do that, and a number of the national labs here do have open science and open software policies, but none of them are public. And so we just had this discussion about how do we deal with that? And the answer at this point is we don't know, and we're not going to for this round at least. Any other comments or questions? Okay, so Hugh, maybe we'll go back to the slides for a minute then.
Yeah, sure thing.
Okay. Okay, thanks. So yeah, so I mean, I think we're certainly happy to continue talking, but we also don't necessarily need to keep this going for longer than there's interest and interest in talking or learning. So just in the kind of as a wrap up to some extent, you can join the working group through the RDA website that Amy has proven. And if you do that, then you'll find out about our calls, which are roughly monthly. And you can also then get involved in the subgroups through that. You can engage with RISA as well as the working group. So again, RISA is one of the 2 co-conveners of the working group. We have a Slack where you can talk about things that are happening in your community, and that can include funding opportunities or new policies or discussions or new hiring of research software engineers or lots of things. And if you sign up for the RISA newsletter, then you'll get roughly monthly again, a newsletter that talks about community news and relevant things that are going on in the research software world. And then finally, as again, Amy was volunteering, in some ways you can either actively share groups, share details about what we're doing in this group with your peers and collaborators and institutional management, or you can kind of give us, help us with information and ways to get to those people, and then we'll do that as well. But we do want to get as much input as we can, because we really do think that the more thoughts and perspectives we consider, the better we're going to be, the better off we'll be in the end, and the more useful our work will be. So I think there is, I don't know, the next slide might just be the end. Yeah, so that's it. Carlos's email is at the end of this, and you can always contact him for details, or you can contact really any of us that are here. And maybe we'll put the slides back down at this point and just see if there's any other discussion that anybody wants to have, any other things anybody has thought of that we should be, groups we should be reaching out to, other communication we should be doing, anything that seems like it would make this better and more effective. Yeah, Tom?
I put it in the notes, but I'm hoping to connect this activity to the reproducibility networks that we're trying to bridge RDA activity and external activity through the reproducibility interest group as well. And I think you'd find some allies in this work in that space as well. I think sometimes the challenge is reifying the category in people's minds. They don't necessarily see, like, they understand tools and so on as being a part of the landscape. They don't necessarily see it as something that is produced and maintained by the sector itself. So I certainly intend to be promoting the work of this group, and it, like, that whole body around policy change is totally harmonious with that group as well. Just because they're pursuing a different type of policy change doesn't mean that you couldn't work together on understanding that space and coming up with frameworks that are compatible with each other as well.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. I mean, I think almost everything that's in subgroup 2 at this point doesn't really have anything to do with research software, at least as it started. It's all the kind of this general question about policy change and how it happens.
Yeah, it's fabulous work, by the way. Really, really impressed by 6 months in how productive the working group's been.
Thank you. All right, any other comments from anybody? Or any closing comments from Michelle or Hugh?
No, thank you everyone for your contributions. That was really useful. Lots of things we can follow up on. And I've taken some notes.
Yeah,
in
again,
the shared document.
Okay, yeah, well, thank you very much. We will follow up with Amy, who volunteered to help connect us with a few things. If you're interested in this, keep an eye on the notes document. I think it's next, I can't remember if it's next Tuesday or Wednesday, but sometime next week there's the repeat session that's at a much more European-friendly time, and I'm guessing we'll have a completely different group of people that hopefully will have some overlapping comments, but maybe we'll have some different comments as well, and so it might be interesting just to see what appears at that point. Okay, so again, repeating for Michelle, thank you all very much, and hope we will see you in one of our monthly calls or in one of the subgroup working activities. Okay, bye.